Hello everyone. Our next topic in central nervous system is hypothalamus. So we have been continuously discussing so many topics under central nervous system. That is, you have been taught regarding this ascending tracts, descending tracts, cerebral cortex, and thalamus, etc. So here, uh, in the particular topic called hypothalamus, we are going to discuss what are the different functions that are done by hypothalamus. So unlike thalamus, hypothalamus is going to do its function right from head to toe. Hypothalamus, it is going to coordinate with the structures called limbic system, autonomic nervous system, and also with the endocrine functions. It is doing its all the vegetative role and also the endocrine functions in the body. Now here, the picture also says that it is involved in the regulation of food intake, it is involved in the regulation of temperature, it is also helping for the regulation of thirst mechanism and emotional behavior, etc. Let's move on to the topic. Objectives. We are going to describe the nuclei and the connections involved in hypothalamus, and we are going to describe in detail about the functions of hypothalamus, and we are going to describe the hypothalamic disorders. Hypothalamus. Where exactly the hypothalamus is located? Let's see the anatomy of hypothalamus. Here the section of skull is given, and we have the cerebral cortex, cerebrum, and then the small portion is magnified here. Now look at the structure of thalamus, where exactly the thalamus is located. Just below the thalamus we have the hypothalamus. So what are the anatomical landmarks of hypothalamus? Anteriorly it is related to the optic chiasma. You can see a small eminence just below the hypothalamus called optic chiasma. So here optic chiasma, the anterior relation to the hypothalamus is the optic chiasma. And what is the posterior relation? The posterior relation is the median eminence, mammillary body. So the eminence that called mammillary body, it is the posterior relation. So anteriorly from optic chiasma to posteriorly to the mammillary body, the hypothalamus is extended. Now again, just below the hypothalamus, you can see the infundibulum. And infundibulum continues as the pituitary gland, the master gland of the human body, called anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. So again, we'll just discuss a little more about the optic chiasma and mammillary body. So optic chiasma, where exactly the optic chiasma is located? It is the one of the important part of the visual pathway. Now imagine, again we'll just go back to the picture. So here there's an eye, there's retina, and again retina carries the retina continues as the optic nerve, and the visual pathway comes and visual pathway reaches the optic chiasma. Now this optic chiasma, just behind the optic chiasma the hypothalamus is located. And again, on the other hand, on the posterior side of the hypothalamus, there is a small eminence called mammillary body. So here we can easily define the anatomical landmarks of the hypothalamus. Again, here something I want to tell, that is pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is also, it is structurally and both functionally it is correlated with the hypothalamus. So again, we have the hypothalamus here, and we are going to see, this class, we are going to see the different nuclei that are present in the hypothalamus. Let's see the structure, what are the different nuclei present in the hypothalamus, and then we'll see the connections, how the nuclei are connected to other structures or the adjacent structures of the central nervous system. And then we'll see what are the functions of. Once you understand the connections, you can yourself, you can just explain the functions of the hypothalamus. And again, the hypothalamus is described as the head ganglion of autonomic nervous system. So again, the autonomic nervous system is actually controlled by hypothalamus. Autonomic nervous system itself, like it is a autonomic system, that is it is going to act on its own, and that itself controlled by hypothalamus. Again, hypothalamus is acting along with the limbic system, and therefore all the limbic system, hypothalamus, autonomic nervous system, and all the structures are interrelated, and they are going to act in a coordinated manner. And hypothalamus is a bilateral structure, extends from the region of the optic chiasma to the caudal border of mammillary body. Just look at the eminence, the optic chiasma, look at the optic nerve, and you can see the optic chiasma over here, And anteriorly, the hypothalamus, anteriorly, it is having relation with the hypothalamus, optic chiasma, and posteriorly, there's a small eminence called mammillary body. And this is anteripituitary and posterior pituitary, and we have the thalamus here. Now moving on to what are the different nuclei present in the hypothalamus. So again, I told you two important landmarks, that is optic chiasma and mammillary body. If you remember these two, then you can easily define the nuclei. The four areas. Actually, all the nuclei of hypothalamus are they are divided into four regions. Those are preoptic area, that is the region that is present just in front of optic chiasma, that is like preoptic nuclei. And moving on to second area called supraoptic area. Obviously, according to its name, supraoptic, just above the optic chiasma or superior to optic chiasma, called supraoptic area. It's called anterior. Anteriorly, it is present. And what is the middle portion? Middle portion is tuberal area. So here we have the tuber cinereum, and just above this we have this portion called tuberal area, called the middle portion. And then posteriorly we have something called, I told you, the eminence called mammillary body, and of course the name, it gets the name of mammillary area, which becomes obviously the posterior area. Now in each and every area we are going to have different nuclei. So if this is done, if you are able to understand this, again you can define the nuclei. Under preoptic area we have two different nuclei. Those are medial preoptic nucleus and lateral preoptic nucleus. Then moving on to anterior or supraoptic region, we have a few nucleus, that is anterior, supraoptic nuclei, paraventricular nuclei, and suprachiasmatic nuclei. Suprachiasmatic and supraoptic are located just below, and we have the anterior nuclei here, and then we have the paraventricular above. Now moving on to middle region, that is tuberal region. Middle region, we have an arcuate nucleus, ventromedial and dorsomedial. So dorsomedial nuclei and ventromedial nuclei. And then we have a small arcuate nucleus in the middle region. And moving on to posterior. So posterior, of course, posterior nuclei, and mammillary region, therefore mammillary nuclei. So these are the different nucleus present in the hypothalamus. So if you are done with two demarcations, that is optic chiasma and mammillary body, then you can easily understand what are the different nuclei, what are the different regions, and in each region what are the different nuclei present. Yes, now we are moving on to the connections. Now we are going to discuss how the hypothalamus is connected to the adjacent structures of central nervous system. So I don't want to complicate things, so I've just given few important connections, very important connections. And then I've just listed few afferents and efferents of hypothalamus, which are very important to understand the functions. So if you want to read the connections in detail, you can go for a good neuroanatomy book. Now, mammillary bodies. Mammillary bodies is a part of hypothalamus. Then it is connected to anterior nucleus of thalamus. Then again it is connected to cingulate gyrus. The same is connected to hypothalamus. Then hypothalamus go back to mammillary body. They are sending their neurons to these structures and they form a circuit. This is called PAP circuit, and PAP circuit is very important for the emotional behavior, maintenance of emotional behavior or the control of emotional behavior, and it is also helping for learning and memory. For a person, the various components of memory, the short-term memory, long-term memory, the various types of memory, all are controlled by the one of an important structure called PAP circuit. And the second connection would be the retina. The retinohypothalamic fibers. What are retinohypothalamic fibers? So the fibers from the optic chiasma goes to hypothalamus and also to the pineal body. And this hypothalamic pineal body connections, these fibers are very important for melatonin secretion, since this is very important for biological clock. What is biological clock? What is circadian rhythm? It is nothing but the day-night variation. How the melatonin secretion, then ACTH secretion, they varies. The cortisol secretion varies. Their variation is seen in this day-night cycle. So again, why this hormonal variation, hormonal secretion variation is seen? This is seen due to the visual fibers which are coming from the retina. So retinal fibers during daytime, of course, the retina is going to receive the light rays, and the light is just falling on the optic chiasma, and these are carried by the hypothalamic pineal body fibers, and this causes again, which in turn secretes the cortisol, and they are just helping with each other to secrete the hormones. So based on the biological clock or the circadian rhythm. Now hypothalamus is having connection with anterior pituitary, and anterior pituitary, we all know it is secreting few hormones like growth hormone, then ACTH, then TSH, FSH, and then LH, and they are acting towards their target gland. So by just coordinating with all the with the pituitary gland, the endocrine role, autonomic nervous system, and all other things, hypothalamus is said to be the main important structure which is actually controlling the entire homeostasis. So maintenance of internal environment is done by hypothalamus. This is very important. So hypothalamus, again through posterior pituitary, it is controlling the water reabsorption, and by just secreting the oxytocin, it is helping for milk ejection, and also it is helping for parturition. Again, the hypothalamus through the fibers to the autonomic nervous system, the parts of autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, can control the heart and blood vessels. So this is how all the functions of the hypothalamus is finally they are acting together to maintain the homeostasis of the body. So let's see what are the afferent and efferent connections. The afferent and efferent connections. So here the hypothalamus, the reticular activating system is giving its afferent. Then fibers are coming from olfactory area, then frontal lobe of cortex, then the hippocampus, then thalamus and amygdala. And they are giving their afferents, and efferents obviously they will just go to the fibers which are moving down as the fibers goes to spinal cord, fibers goes to brainstem, and it also goes to ANS, and it is also going to the pituitary gland. So this is how the afferent and efferent connections are happening towards the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus and limbic system. So this picture clearly explains how limbic system is doing its function along with hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is directly sending fibers, efferents and afferents towards the adjacent structures. So limbic system mainly involved in control of emotional behavior. So this behavior is, again, it is based on hypothalamus. Just imagine that you're stressed or you're anxious or you're very happy. So during all these conditions, the behavior is actually projected to the limbic system. The limbic system is getting stimulated, and whenever this limbic system is stimulated, they are going to send impulses even to the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is going to act accordingly. This picture says that the cortex, hypothalamus is controlled by cortex, and also the subcortical structures like amygdala and the fornix and medial forebrain bundle, etc. And they are sending afferents to the hypothalamus, and from hypothalamus the entire homeostatic mechanism is happening. So it is happening from the brain, that is, I told you, something called head to toe, which means the hypothalamus functions are from head, that is cortex, towards the cortex to toe, that is head to toe. Now we are moving on to the functions of hypothalamus. In general, you just remember two things. One thing I just want to tell, that hypothalamus is doing its function along with limbic system, autonomic nervous system and endocrine role. The endocrine role is very, very important. And the second thing is, by just coordinating with all the organs and all the functions of the body, hypothalamus is involved in maintenance of homeostasis or maintenance of internal environment. Again, so therefore hypothalamus, if you see the functions of hypothalamus, it is not something defined to muscle, or it is not something defined to some one particular organ. It is going to have a wide range of actions which are actually helpful for the homeostasis, maintenance of normal homeostasis. Functions, if you see the functions again, you see the autonomic system, Then it is controlling the food intake, it is controlling the temperature, it is controlling thirst and fluid regulation, it is controlling endocrine function, reproduction, sleep and wakefulness, emotion, stress, circadian rhythm, visceral functions, somatic, reward and punishment. So we are going to discuss each and every function in detail. Moving on to the first function called hypothalamic control of anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary, so we all know that all the releasing hormones are secreted by hypothalamus. Look at the releasing hormone, gonadotrophin releasing hormone, corticotrophin releasing hormone, thyroid releasing hormone. Now these releasing hormones are acting on the particular cells of or the respective cells of anterior pituitary, which cause their respective secretion of the hormones. So gonadotrophin releasing hormone secretes FSH or LH. Corticotrophin releasing hormone secrete ACTH. Thyroid releasing hormone secrete TSH. Again, prolactin releasing hormone and dopamine has action on secretion of prolactin. Now, growth hormone. Growth hormone, there are two hormones in the hypothalamus, growth hormone releasing hormone, then growth hormone inhibiting hormone, otherwise called somatostatin, cause the secretion of GH. Now, imagine all the endocrine functions. See all the endocrine functions of anterior pituitary. So again, we know very clearly that anterior pituitary is the one controlling most of the hormonal secretions. Now, these anterior pituitary hormones are actually controlled by hypothalamus. Now, the gonads, the functions of adrenal cortex, then functions of thyroid, functions of mammary gland, all are depend on hypothalamus. And then moving on to posterior pituitary. Now, the posterior pituitary secretes two hormones, the ADH and oxytocin. These two hormones are actually synthesized by hypothalamus, the neurosecretory cells, supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei. The second ADH is acting on kidney, and then oxytocin. ADH is important for the maintenance of water and it is acting on the kidney. So oxytocin, it is acting on mammary gland. So by just doing all these functions, imagine the hypothalamus is almost controlling all the organs of the body. Posterior pituitary, we were discussing that posterior pituitary secrete, the hormone is actually synthesized in the hypothalamus, but it is secreted into the posterior pituitary through hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract, neural tract. Moving on to the next function, control of hunger and feeding. So hunger and feeding. So feeding and satiety center, they are actually located in hypothalamus. So lateral hypothalamus is responsible for the feeding center. The hypothalamus has particular nuclei which is going to sense all the nutrient level, for example glucose level, for example the polypeptide level, or for example the leptin level in the blood, and whenever their level goes up, and immediately the hypothalamic nuclei are going to sense and they are going to stimulate the satiety center, and therefore the satiety center is going to inhibit the feeding center, and therefore the feeding stops. The person is going to stop eating. Now these are actually balanced. The feeding center and the satiety center are balanced with each other. So the feeding center is located in the lateral hypothalamus. The ventral medial nuclei is the nuclei for satiety center. Now this control of hunger and feeding is by few theories called glucostat theory, aminostatic theory and lipostatic theory. So what are they telling? They're actually explaining some concept related to blood glucose level, the amino acid or the polypeptide level, and also the leptin level in the blood. So when will they increase? We eat and immediately the blood glucose level is going to increase. So in the hypothalamus, in the particular nuclei, we have few receptors which will sense the increase in the blood glucose level. There is a set point, and whenever the glucose levels or polypeptide levels are increased, for example glucose level is increased, and immediately the satiety center will be stimulated, and this satiety center which in turn will go and inhibit the feeding center, and this causes the person to stop eating, and this is called glucostatic theory. And the same concept which is applicable, instead of blood glucose and whenever there's an increase in amino acid level, then it causes the aminostatic hypothesis. And again, moving on to lipostatic hypothesis. What do they say lipostatic hypothesis? There's a hormone called leptin which is actually synthesized from adipose tissue, and this leptin level whenever they increase in the blood, and it will be sensed by the receptor which are particularly exclusively meant for leptin, that is leptin receptors are present in the nuclei, hypothalamic nuclei. So this leptin receptors will again stimulate the satiety center. Again, the satiety center, which in turn will go and inhibit the feeding center, and the person stops eating. Now, this is what they say, how the hypothalamus regulates the body weight. They have a set point. The hypothalamus will have a set point. Therefore, by just coordinating with all other adjacent areas, and also by just following few theories, like the body weight is actually maintained. Why does a hypophagia in diabetes mellitus? It's a good question. In diabetes mellitus, the ventromedial nucleus is deprived of glucose due to deficiency of insulin. So insulin is absent, and therefore increase in the activity of feeding center, and that causes hypophagia. Now here, no insulin, and again the glucose cannot go into the ventromedial nucleus, and therefore the feeding center is continuously stimulated. Whenever the feeding center is continuously stimulated, the person is going to eat a lot. That causes hypophagia. So regulation of body temperature. Again, this is again one of the important concepts that you have to understand. Like food, the satiety center and the feeding center, here body temperature is also maintained. They are actually balanced with each other, like anterior hypothalamus and the posterior hypothalamus. Anterior hypothalamus is the nuclei for increase in body temperature. It detects increase in body temperature, and the posterior hypothalamus detects decrease in body temperature. So again, here also hypothalamus has a set point. It has a set point for maintenance of body temperature. So whenever the body temperature goes above the set point, again the anterior hypothalamus senses it. And again, whenever it decreases, the posterior hypothalamus will have few receptors, and they are going to sense the decrease in temperature, and they are going to act accordingly. Now let's see a picture. So again, whenever there's a decrease in temperature, the cold receptors are stimulated, then immediately the whole body will go for heat conservation. How the heat conservation is happening? So thermostat will on. Thermostat is something like hypothalamus is said to be the thermostat, and the mechanism is going to switch on, and therefore it causes the posterior hypothalamus to cause vasoconstriction. And therefore, whenever there's a vasoconstriction, there is a heat retain. There's a retention of heat, and therefore the body temperature will come back to normal. And again, whenever there is an increase in body temperature, this causes warm receptors to increase. That is, warm receptors are stimulated. Then obviously the body needs to lose the heat. So again, there will be dissipation of heat, or there will be expenditure of heat. And this is sensed by, whenever there's an increase in temperature, that is sensed by anterior hypothalamus, and this anterior hypothalamus stimulates the adjacent structures and causes cutaneous vasodilation and sweating. We'll see a picture which explains the increase or decrease in temperature. Now let's see. Imagine that peripheries are hot, and peripheries are hot. The hot is actually sensed by anterior hypothalamus. So this anterior hypothalamus is going to work the capillaries dilate near skin surface to lose heat to the environment through the sympathetic nervous system, and this causes sweat glands begin to secrete, causing heat loss by evaporation. And it causes heat loss, and whenever the peripheries are vasodilated, again this causes heat to disseminate. Heat is lost to the environment. So the blood temperature, this is the normal temperature, that is 37.4 degrees Celsius. The blood temperature approaches hypothalamic set point, and heat loss or heat retention mechanism return to baseline state. Now here, behavioral, that is warmer or cooler clothing and environments, also one factor which is coordinating with this. On the other hand, when the peripheries are cold, just imagine, see, look at this, there's the peripheral capillaries under the skin. They undergo vasoconstriction. And again, look at this, yes, sweat glands are all closed. Therefore, the evaporation of air is just closed. And therefore, heat is retained in this condition. And this is happening through the posterior hypothalamus, and this is happening through the anterior hypothalamus. And control of water intake and thirst, it is happening by two mechanisms. So whenever body is whenever the water content of the body is decreased, so water can be retained, or it can be taken from outside, which means again the hypothalamus, if detects that water content is reduced in the blood, or the volume of the water is reduced in the blood, so hypothalamus can increase the water level, or in the other hand, or the plasma volume level by two mechanisms. One is through osmoreceptors and other one is through the thirst mechanism. So how osmoreceptors? Why osmoreceptors? Osmoreceptors are very powerful to increase the plasma volume. They are actually located in the supraoptic nuclei. What these osmoreceptors will do? Whenever the volume, the plasma volume decreases, obviously it's going to cause hyperosmolality, and this increase in osmolality is sensed by the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. And these osmoreceptors are going to increase the water intake, and therefore it is it is bringing the plasma volume back. On the other hand, it is also working through thirst mechanism. So thirst mechanism is through actually there are few centers in the hypothalamus which are called thirst center. So whenever these thirst centers are stimulated directly, it stimulates thirst in a person, and the person tends to drink more water, and therefore the water level in the body increases, and again the water intake, the plasma volume is corrected in the body. So regulation of ECF volume, of course, it actually very similar to the previous one, that is maintenance of osmolality. So ECF volume, the baroreceptors, whenever there is a decrease in ECF volume, the baroreceptors are stimulated, and again the baroreceptors are going to cause the increase in ADH secretion. So how the volume is restored? Whenever there is a decrease in ECF volume, so decrease in baroreceptor, whenever the baroreceptor signals are decreased, it causes increase in antidiuretic hormone secretion. What happens whenever this antidiuretic hormone secretion happens? It increases water retention. Then when thirst center is stimulated, causes increase in water intake, and the person drinks water. And then on the other hand, it stimulates the angiotensin 2 mechanism. So angiotensin 2 mechanism works again with the three mechanisms, with aldosterone, ADH and thirst mechanism. Finally, the volume is, the ECF volume is restored. Role in memory, we've already seen this, how PAP circuit and along with the limbic system through sending fibers, it is maintaining the memory. Reproduction control. Hypothalamus secretes gonadotrophin releasing hormone. So any action related to reproduction cannot happen without gonadotrophin releasing hormone. So in female, like all the reproductive functions are dependent on FSH and LH, and secretion of FSH, LH, which in turn is depending on the gonadotrophin releasing hormone. So role in emotion. So any kind of emotional thing or which are actually involving the cerebral cortex. So hypothalamus, limbic system and cerebral cortex, they all are actually coordinating with each other and causes control of. And circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm, in animal and in humans, certain body functions are tuned to the day-night cycle. That's what we were talking, like it's otherwise called biological clock. And the nuclei for circadian rhythm is suprachiasmatic nuclei. These functions are referred to as diurnal or circadian rhythm. It is mediated through retinohypothalamo-pineal system. The retinal fibers are very important for the normal functioning of the circadian rhythm. And few examples for circadian rhythm, that is day-night variation, is cortisol secretion. How cortisol is not secreted, during night and early morning it is increased, and body temperature variation, morning it will be high, and ACTH secretion, sleep wakeful cycle, how person sleeps at night, morning wakes up, the 8 hours of sleep, how this 8 hours of sleep is actually regulated through the circadian rhythm. So this sleep wakeful cycle is actually happening through the sleep centers and also through the reticular activating system, and reticular activating system which in turn sending fibers to hypothalamus. So another way, like in a coordinated way, the circadian rhythm is also controlling the sleep wakeful circadian rhythm. Look at this, the sleep period. So during the beginning of the sleep, it is almost down. Then again, when the person wakes up after 8 hours of sleep, the cortisol secretion is going to be in the peak level, and then slowly it comes down. Then again, by 12 hours, it is going to again have the second peak, but not as powerful as the early morning. Then slowly it is going to come down at the end of the day. So this is how we can see the circadian rhythm, the biological clock, the day night variation. The night is the day variation. Then moving on to role in sleep and wakeful. Of course, I was telling like sleep wakefulness is actually also happening with the hypothalamus. So there's a nuclei for sleep wakefulness, posterior hypothalamus, intralaminar, anterior hypothalamus, and preoptic area. And again, whenever they are stimulated, they show changes on sleep and role in reward and punishment. So reward and punishment, you can actually refer Guyton. This chapter actually explains this reward and punishment with that monkey experiment. How the limbic system, the behavioral thing is stimulated whenever the limbic system is stimulated. So it is going to show what is reward and what is punishment, what are the important centers involved in reward and punishment, how cerebral cortex is giving its contribution to reward and punishment. Role in stress. So whenever the body is exposed to stress, it could be an internal stress inside the body or it could be external stress. So again, the stress could be sensed by cerebral cortex and limbic system. They are stimulated and the limbic system send their impulses to the hypothalamus. Then hypothalamus, through ACTH and also through sympathetic nervous system, it causes the secretion of catecholamines and also the glucocorticoids, that is the cortisol, and the cortisol and the catecholamines are going to face the stress situation. These are the two hormones helping to face the stress situation. Yes, now almost done. We are moving to the disorders of hypothalamus. Whenever there is any lesion in the hypothalamus, or it could be a hypothalamic syndrome, it could be a partial one or it could be the complete hypothalamus is affected. So any part or if the complete hypothalamus is affected, generally it is called hypothalamic syndrome. And again, the full portion of hypothalamus is affected, then it's called global. And only the partial thing of hypothalamus is affected, called partial hypothalamic syndrome. And here I want to tell you something. The hypothalamus, being a very, the weight of the hypothalamus is only 4 grams. Just imagine our nail. If you take the middle finger nail, it's going to weigh around like only 4 grams. But the function of hypothalamus is like, it's almost, it is controlling from head to toe. So compared to other organs like the adjacent, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, midbrain, and their weight relatively it is double the maybe 20 times or 30 times more than the hypothalamus. But hypothalamus being very small, it can control all the bodily functions. Global. Now we'll just move on to hypothalamic syndrome. What is global hypothalamic syndrome and what is partial hypothalamic? Again, it involves all parts or large part of hypothalamus, and the cause is metastatic carcinoma or lymphoma whenever there's any tumor in the hypothalamus. Of course, because of due to failure of the whole homeostatic mechanism, the person is going to die whenever there's any global hypothalamic syndrome. Then what is partial hypothalamic syndrome? Partial hypothalamic syndrome, the cause is selective lesion. Only one part of the hypothalamus is affected. And of course, if one part is affected, there could be a deficiency or there could be overproduction of single hormone. Different symptoms, different types of partial hypothalamic syndrome could be diabetes insipidus. So what is diabetes insipidus? Increase in diluted urine, increased urine excretion, diluted urine excretion. So this is due to failure of ADH mechanism. There are two types of diabetes insipidus. One is nephrogenic, other one is neurogenic. Whenever the neurogenic, what is a neurogenic diabetes insipidus? Neurogenic is due to failure of secretion of ADH in the hypothalamus itself or in the posterior pituitary itself. That causes neurogenic. What is nephrogenic? ADH will be secreted from posterior pituitary, but it cannot go and act on the nephrons, and there could be a problem with aquaporin ADH system. That's called nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, and obviously it's going to end up in increased urine, diluted urine output. Body weight alteration. Since the hypothalamus is controlling the, it has a set point for maintenance of body weight. It has a feeding center, it has a satiety center. So we all know, like, whenever the feeding center has a lesion, the feeding center, the person cannot eat. And again, whenever the satiety center is affected, there's a lesion. Again, this is going to cause the person to become obese. So very simple, the body weight alteration is caused due to any lesion in the food intake centers of hypothalamus. Disturbance in temperature regulation. Again, there are two nuclei. The temperature maintenance, again, it's going to cause the hypothermia or poikilothermia. Then precocious puberty. Why there's a precocious puberty? Puberty is attained even in the early age itself due to excessive gonadotropin releasing hormone, due to any tumor in the gonadotropin releasing hormones or in the part of hypothalamus. There's excessive secretion of GnRH. This causes very early stage of puberty, even in the age of maybe 6 to 7. This causes precocious, this is called precocious puberty. Now, we are almost done with the class hypothalamus. Now, I want everyone to draw a concept mapping. Concept mapping is actually, you correlate, you must have done concept mapping earlier, but I want to just tell you 1 or 2 points regarding this. Concept mapping is something like you put all the concepts, so for example, some 2-3 concepts. Maybe you can just imagine that anatomy or biochemistry or physiology concepts together in one single paper. So like that, you put many concepts in one single diagram. That's how you do the mapping of any concept. So here we are just going to make a concept mapping for the beginner level. So I just want to tell you that what are the different nuclei present in the hypothalamus and what are their respective functions. You can use different color pens, and you can use even your creative ideas and put your thoughts. Look at this, a biological clock. I've just drawn a clock. So like that, for each and every function, you can use your own thoughts, and maybe you can add more points also, and everything to be done in one single paper. That's how you put your concepts in one single paper, called concept mapping. And this could be example 1. This is a very basic thing I have just done, just to tell you how concept mapping can be done. So use this. I'm just also to explain like the different nuclei and also the functions. So use this, and you can do your concept mapping on your own. We are just ending with the class. Thank you.